What will Apple show off at WWDC?
And what does the future hold for Windows Mobile? Welcome to Vertical Hold, the tech show where we channel surf through the headlines in search of the big picture. I'm Adam Turner and I'm here with a man who's known in all 5 boroughs, Alex Kibnan. Alex, what's new in tech?
ASUS has launched its first robotic home companion. The US $599 Zenbo is voice-controlled, rolls around on a circular base that hides 2 wheels, and can be used to control home automation tasks. No word as yet as to whether we'll see Zenbo in Australia, but ASUS's other launches of tablets and possibly smartphones locally seems more likely.
Up to 360 million MySpace usernames and passwords have been leaked online, for accounts going back more than a decade. Sure, MySpace is no longer cool, but it's a timely reminder not to reuse passwords.
Remember when processors were just about speed? Now it's all about cores, with Intel debuting its first desktop 10-core processor, unless you're rocking a Xeon desktop because they've had 10-core for a while. The Core i7-6950X Extreme Edition specifically. That's extreme as in powerful, as you'd expect from a deca-core processor, and also extreme in price. Don't expect much change out of $1,800 for one of these not-so-little numbers.
Sydney intends to trial traffic lights embedded in the footpath to stop smartphone users walking into traffic because they're not paying attention to the road. The $260,000 6-month trial will start with 5 intersections across the city, responding to the fact that pedestrian deaths rose 50% last year.
So Adam, another week and another leak of password information, this time, from all places, MySpace. Should we really be concerned? Because, it's MySpace, isn't it?
Well, I can proudly say, hand on heart, that I never had a MySpace account. And I think a lot of people my age probably did, but it's pretending like that you never...
I must hang my head in shame,
it's like...
I think I did. Although, having said that, I think I did because I'm a tech journalist and it's a good idea to be on top of tech topics. I can't say I was ever enamoured of the service.
It's like people from the 70s who swear they never wore platform heels and flares. We know you did, But the problem is that not even if you haven't used your MySpace account for a while, particularly if you created your MySpace account 10 years ago, people were a lot less vigilant about things like not sharing passwords. And I know I'm guilty of that as well. And every few years...
Adam.
Yeah, I know, but I've got better at it. Every few years, I sit down and I have a bit of a security audit. I look at my passwords and think, right, this one's not strong enough. I'm using this one in too many places. And the first thing that triggered that off is I realized that... back in the dark old days when you go down to the video rental store to rent a movie, they'd ask you what your password was when you handed over your card and expect you to shout your password. Anyone in earshot could hear it. And I realized that every time I handed over my card, I was shouting out my banking password. And I thought, this is not cool. This is not a good idea. So that's when I set off down the path on...
It's an even worse idea when you say to the guy behind the counter, Oh, I remember it. It's my banking password. And
yes. So that was like, okay, I get it now. This is a really bad idea to reuse the same password for everything. And I'd be lying if I said every single password I use is unique. But the more important the password is, the less likely I am to use that password somewhere else. And the most important ones are long and complicated and unique. And I use a few tricks like, using a rhyme or the lyrics from the song, taking the first letter, throwing in a bit of uppercase and lowercase and a few numbers so it looks like gibberish to anyone else, but I can kind of sing along as I put in my password and remember it.
As long as you're not singing out loud while you're doing it.
Yes.
It's still rather obvious and kind of annoying. Look, my strategy, my general advice on this one is to grab password management software. It is the way to go.
I use some of that as well, yeah.
Whether you use KeePass or Dashlane or 1Password, they will generate complex passwords for you. Most of the better ones will now audit your password, so they will say, hey, you've used this somewhere else, don't do that, naughty, 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 bad. And some of them will even, in fact, alert you when there's been a major breach and say, hey, look, this service had a breach at this point. It'd be a good idea to change that password. So, and they're not difficult to set up. And then all you need, of course, is one really strong, unique password. Then you've only got to remember one. It does the rest of the remembering for you. I'm getting older and it's harder to remember things when you get older. So just having one password and one secure password is a really good way to go. As long as, of course, you don't use that secure password for something else.
Like the video store. So, Alex, Apple's Worldwide Developer Conference is coming up soon, and I know you're the kind of guy who gets up early in the morning to watch these things. What do you think we might hear about this year?
Well, it's really interesting because Apple, of course, is notorious for its secrecy.
No, say it's not true.
I was stunned as you are. So there's an awful lot of speculation at the moment as to what they might do. Some of it seems reasonably founded in possible reality. Some of it is, of course, out there in cloud cuckoo land. The big important thing to remember about WWDC is the DC bit. It's a developer conference.
Yeah.
It's actually where Apple gets software developers together and says, right, here's all the cool new stuff that we're doing in upcoming projects and how to do stuff with our existing stuff. Here's how to use it so you can maximize it, and also, of course, so they can then maximize the profit. Because if somebody comes up with an awesome Mac app or an awesome iPhone app, they get a cut of that as well. So, everybody wins in their world. But as such, the focus is not so much on the end consumer. This is not a CES or even a Mobile World Congress, although, of course, those also have their serious sides. This is the developer conference.
It's still really important to consumers and the entire ecosystem, because all these companies are nothing without their developers. If no one wants to make apps for you, you turn into Windows Mobile. So it really is crucial to keep your developers. Yes, exactly. So it really is crucial to keep your developers happy, keep your developers informed, making it as easy for them and hopefully as profitable for them as possible to keep doing what they do best, because then people will buy gear.
Yeah, absolutely. But having said that, Apple, loves a bit of hype, loves a bit of media attention, has put out media invites for this one. Mine seems to have gone missing in the post.
Must be lost with mine. They must have got stuck together. Yeah.
That's a mystery, really. But they like a bit of media attention, and they have used WWDC in the past to make some major announcement. But of course, what Apple thinks of as a major announcement might not be what consumers think of as a major announcement.
Yeah.
So in terms of what seems actually likely, they will almost certainly announce the next version of macOS, and they'll probably, this has been widely tipped, rebrand it to just be macOS as opposed to OS X or OS X, depending on where you sit on that particular fence.
Yeah.
It'll just become macOS in the same way that the phones and tablets are iOS and the TV is tvOS. It'll sit within that branding umbrella. It will presumably have new features, and I'm guessing, because past history is a decent indicator of this, that it will be a free upgrade for existing Mac owners, and presumably an impetus for people to potentially buy Macs. Now, to accompany that, it is possible that they might announce some hardware refreshers on the Mac side, so maybe some new MacBook Pros or Mac Pro models. Probably not a new MacBook, because they've relatively recently only just upgraded that.
Yeah.
Maybe a new MacBook Air. If you want to get really hopeful, Mac Mini, but I would not be holding my breath on that one.
And it's not the kind of time that we're likely to hear about an iPhone 7.
No, look, I mean, so the rumour mills are already kicking off for the iPhone 7, but I think the odds of the iPhone 7 making an actual physical appearance at WWDC are exceptionally slim. They will almost certainly talk about the next version of iOS 10, but they will presume that developers will be developing for the hardware they've got right now.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, the iPhone 6S and 6S Plus.
It's usually about September, October we hear about new iPhones, yeah?
Absolutely, and I don't think this year's going to be any particular difference. Obviously, I'm not Apple. My drone cameras keep
that would explain why you return my calls.
So I don't have any special insight, but I'd be very, very surprised if they announce anything, simply because they know that they've got a large base of consumers now who are sitting on 1 to 2 year contracts that will expire around September, October. And if they suddenly announce a new one now, it upsets that apple cart, and they run the risk of pushing, even more market share towards Android, which they very fervently do not want to do.
Cannot afford,
iPhone 7, no, it's not really going to happen. I'd be more willing to believe that they might do an upgrade, for example, and even this I think is a long shot, an upgrade to the Apple Watch, because that's sitting on its 12-month anniversary. But again, that thing hasn't sold anywhere near as well as they would have liked, and they still haven't come up with that real killer use case.
That's what I was going to say. People are still sitting around going, well, it looks good, but what the hell do I do with it? Yeah, it's still the classic solution looking for a problem.
Exactly, and this is again where we come back to that developers thing. I'm sure they'll be talking to developers about watchOS, and potentially there could be a new version of watchOS to run on the watch itself, and maybe there'll be some great new feature, and a developer will come up with something where everyone goes, oh my god, the Apple Watch is so much better than the competition, in the same way that the original iPhone kind of jumped the feature phones of its day. But that hasn't happened yet, and that may never happen for this particular form factor or this bit of hardware. I'd be surprised to see a new Apple Watch, but I think it's far, far more likely than a new iPhone. So, Adam, all is not exactly well in the world of Windows Phone, is it?
Well, I don't know if you could ever say there was a time when things were well in Windows Phone, but things are more unwell than ever. Yes, it went through a bit of a spike. It's probably got to the point where they were looking at maybe 5% market share. A few years ago, they paid $10 billion for Nokia. They made the Nokia Lumia phones their flagship Windows phones. Very nice phones, very nice cameras, and they were starting to turn things around and sort of mesh it all together with Windows 10. And then it all just kind of fell apart, and their market share now is down to about 1%. They chucked away the Nokia name last year, and now they're just getting out of making smartphones completely. They're taking the factories that belong to them through Nokia. They're selling them to one of Apple's hardware partners. And there's actually talk that some mysterious Finnish company is trying to buy back the Nokia name and will use that factory to remake new Nokia phones running Android, which is, maybe what they should have done to begin with. But
Nokia to make Android phones, though, is one of those rumours that kind of never dies.
No, because it makes more sense than what they bloody did. That's why that rumour never died. But so the question, Microsoft insists this is not the end for Windows Phone. They're going to keep maintaining the platform for the Lumias that are already out there. They're going to keep maintaining the platform for their handful of partners like Alcatel and a couple of others who still make Windows Phone devices. But I wouldn't be betting the farm that it's going to be around for that much longer. The question is whether this rumor of a Surface phone comes to fruition, because that's kind of where they might try to rebirth Windows Phone and claim, hey, look, it's all new and shiny and maybe you should give it a go.
See, I have no specific insight, not being Microsoft either. But for the Surface phone, there's part of my head that says, well, yeah, look, I get that the Surface brand has a bit more appeal. I tend to think that unless they wanted to completely revitalise again, and this would be the fourth or fifth time that they've kind of said, oh, existing Windows Phone users, yeah, sorry about that, buy new hardware.
Yeah.
But unless they went down that road with Surface Phone as an absolute brand, I think it's probably going to be a little bit too little too late, because the reality for them is, as you say, I mean, an awful lot of the Lumia phones were perfectly decent devices. There were probably too many of them. Like there was that awful kind of indistinct patch of phones in the roughly 600 series, which none of them were terrible phones, and they were quite reasonably priced and all the rest of that. But telling the difference between them at a consumer end level was nigh on impossible. You had your few premium handsets, and they were quite decent, but they never quite pushed beyond that barrier of being absolutely exceptional, unless you really love the platform. And undeniably, there'll be a few people hearing this seething with rage, and I know there are people out there who really do love the platform. Yes. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with choice. And I've long said that Windows Phone was a really good information-centric platform. But as we were talking earlier in terms of Apple devs, Microsoft never seemed to really get the devs on board to develop the apps that were exclusive to them and that were really enticing enough for that broader audience to move away from either Android or iOS. And as such, as a platform, it just doesn't seem to have that consumer bite through to kind of go that much more mass market. I mean, I think it's very telling at the moment, for example, Optus is running a deal where if you sign up for the Lumia 950, quite a nice high-end device, they'll give you an Xbox One. It's a big Microsoft play there.
So
and
they'll give
in
you
both
two
cases,
things that Microsoft are losing money on.
But they're both kind of struggling in their respective markets against either Android or iOS or the PlayStation 4. It's kind of this, here's the stuff we've got, and neither are terrible things or a terrible deal to speak of. But at the same time, it speaks volumes about the fact that neither is particularly robust enough in that consumer desirable way to stand on their own 2 feet.
Because Microsoft wants to have its fingers in a lot of pies and be a broad company, it tries to compete with a lot of people in a lot of spaces, and pretty much the only places where it was really profitable were Windows and Office. And now I think Office 365, the subscription model, is certainly the bread and butter and the lifeblood of the business. But they insist on selling phones, they insist on making consoles, they insist on making MP3 players, they insist on having a go at all this stuff. They're the masters of throwing good money after bad. And But they want to offer the whole package. That's the problem. They think, well, if we leave out one piece of the puzzle, if we don't have a phone, well, then people will go somewhere else where a phone's part of the ecosystem. Or if we don't have an MP3 player, if we don't have a console. But they kind of need to pick what they do well and stick with it. And I think that might actually be Office. They might just have to bite the bullet and say, this is what we do best. People don't necessarily want a phone from us. They don't necessarily want a bottle opener from us. They don't necessarily want a pair of shoes from us.
The phone problem there as well, though, is it very much became a question of getting a phone from Microsoft once they bought Nokia, because that,
which is a great way to piss off your other partners and
exactly
kill your
it was a strong way to say to the rest of the market, look, we're kind of here and we're going to occupy that premium space. And of course, at the same time, they very much mandated what you could put in a hardware sense into a Windows phone, which led them to being a little bit generic as well. Many Windows phones were much like many other Windows phones, and that had the advantage that they could optimize in the same way that Apple optimizes around its iPhones because it's a limited subset of devices. They could optimize around that, which meant that the low power ones were actually probably a little better than, say, an equivalent Android phone on the same hardware.
But Google handled that relationships much better. When they bought Motorola, Google made sure that they didn't play favorites. They also just didn't put out many phones. Well, that too. But in that way, they didn't try and make it look like we're doing favors. Where if you were another Windows phone partner and you were looking at what Microsoft was doing with Nokia, you'd think, well, why am I bothering? Why am I in this game if that's the way you're going to do it?
Well, that just about wraps it up for this episode of Vertical Hold. Remember, if you've got any comments, hit us up in the comments section on YouTube, via Twitter, or the Facebook Vertical Hold page.
Thanks for joining us. Remember, if you like what you hear, hit that subscribe button.